Okay, welcome back everybody. We're on to our Unit 9, and this week we're going to talk about the security team itself. So this is you and your team, or you as a member of a team of security professionals or semi-professionals, and how you interact internally with that team. So we've looked somewhat internally at other partners in the company. We've looked externally at police and how we interact with them. Now we're going to look really introspectively about our own team. I hope the last unit didn't depress you too much. It is apparent that police do not have a high opinion of security, although I will couch that with saying I've never met a cop on the job for more than 10 years that didn't want my job instead. And so I think there is a transition point at some point where people normally join law enforcement very early in their life, and they determine that maybe they should have went a different path. So for those of you who are corporate security majors, take heart in that although the police may not seem to appreciate what you do, they certainly want to do it at some point. So let's go on and start talking about the security team itself and our introspective look at what we're going to do. So this week we're going to take a look at the components of a security team, the different roles and responsibilities, the people that make it up, and what each one of them do. And we're going to look at a mid to larger size organization. Obviously, if you're in a very small organization, there may be only one security person. You may not have any guards at all. You may not have any administration at all. It could just be you. You could be someone who just has other functions, is the HR manager, engineering manager, production manager, who also has security responsibilities. But in this case, we're going to look at a mid to large size organization so we can get a feel for the different roles and responsibilities. We're going to talk a little bit about the impact of mission and size. Certainly because a facility is much, much larger, it needs exponentially more coverage and more staff, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The composition of proprietary versus contracted and hybrid models of security organizations is a quite interesting discussion. Everybody we talk to at first will always say they want a proprietary model, and we'll talk about that in this unit. But as you start to look at the advantages of using some of the other models, I think it tends to change your mind, especially in a professional setting. And one of the big things is that liability shifting that we'll define, and you can see where that can be your friend. So if you've never heard the term straw man before, it is simply an example, right? When you go into a meeting with somebody and you want to give them some general information, then have a discussion about it, you bring in a straw man, right? My straw man model for my security team has a manager or security leader, shift leaders, guards, an administration function, system support, and non-security partners. Now, by non-security partners, I'm not talking about our ESRM partners necessarily, but some of the functions that they provide that you can kind of glom on, if you will. So this strawman security team is not every security team looks like this. There are all kinds of models of security teams, but this one is fairly common in that, again, mid to larger size company at a mid to larger size location. You would normally have this type of a setup. So this is what we're going to use for our strawman team, the one we're going to talk about, just our example team, right? Doesn't really exist, but this is what we're going to talk about. I can't say it doesn't really exist. It certainly does exist, but it doesn't exist universally. But this is the one we're going to use for our example. So let's start to go through what these things do. So you have your manager. The manager could be called a manager. They could be called a director. They could be called a chief security officer, a vice president, depending on the size and scope of the organization. But they are the focal point for at least their location. And they set the vision, goals, and strategies, tactics to get there, right? They determine what the organization is going to do. So a vision might be that you want to be a security organization that is very customer-centric, right? So you're going to set a vision for really highly trained reception posts, right? Security guards at reception posts that are really highly trained and very customer-centric. Or your vision may be that you have a particular facility that has very high volume and very high value resources that may have a public health issue, perhaps a vaccine plant, someplace that has nuclear weapons, right? I mean, that's going to have a different vision. Then you're not as concerned about, although you want everybody to be treated nicely, you're not as concerned about treating your potential visitors like they're kings and queens. You want to know what they're doing there. So your vision and goals and strategies all are set by that manager, what the organization is going to look like and how it's going to function. They're the senior budget manager, right? So they take care of the budget. They're not the only one who takes care of it, but they're the one who is responsible for it. So if you overspend, this is the guy or a girl who's going to be called on the carpet. They are the ESRM subject matter expert. That's without saying. The manager of security or the director, the focal point, the lead, we'll call them the leader, is the ESRM subject matter expert for that location or that company. They're the liaison to senior leadership on all security matters. They go see the president or the CEO or whoever when things go bad or they need a briefing. They lead the team, obviously, and they determine the protection plans, including what staffing is required. So they make up the staffing plan. The others are part of the staffing plan, but the manager is responsible for making up that staffing plan that we're going to talk about. And then they analyze and act against metrics. Now, metrics are just measurements of how things are. So you may have a metric for a guard force that says how many fires could they potentially have stopped last year. Well, they shut off 20 coffee pots that were left on. They unplugged 4 appliances that had smoke smells to them. They came across in the mechanical spaces 2 or 3 belts that were squealing and making, there was an odor of smoke. So you could count all those as metrics. And that's one way you go back to say, this is why I have security officers here at night, because they prevented 20 potential fires last year. They're the ones that set the metrics, analyze them, and then use them to their advantage. Now, that's just one metric. The other one could be prevention of thefts. You could say, in our neighborhood, there are 5 companies similar to us in this industrial park. 4 of the 5 have had car thefts. We've had none. Why? Because we have a guard in the parking lot all the time. That would be a metric that you'd want to brag about. Conversely, if you say, we're one of those 4 and we've had 5 cars stolen, and next door they've had none because they have a guard in their parking lot, that may be a metric you use to get a guard for the parking lot. So they analyze and set the metrics and then act on those metrics. Next, you have shift leaders. This is where I started my career, in fact, at this level, when I came out of the military and while I was working on my first degree. You lead a subset of the team. So you're normally assigned to a shift or a geography, right? Not necessarily a shift leader could be the shift leader for building A. There's another shift leader for building B. Could be you're responsible for a location. Normally it's a shift though. You're afternoon, midnight shift, day shift lead. You're responsible for ensuring the standards are met and tasks are completed just for your area of responsibility, your AOR as it's called. Okay, so the manager sets the standards, sets the vision, sets the tactics and strategies, and you're the one who's making sure that your area and your shift does those things. You're also going to triage anything that happens on your shift. So if something happens on the afternoon shift and you are the afternoon shift leader, your guards may come to you and say, hey, we just had a car stolen. You're not automatically going to say, call the manager and ask them what to do. You will have a process for calling the police, meeting with the police, and then filling in the manager when appropriate. Maybe that's something you want to call them on right away because that's part of your process. It may be something that goes into a report because you work in an urban area where car thefts are very, very common. But you're the one who does the immediate triage and determining the next steps in the tactics for your shift when an incident takes place. You're implementing the protection plan that the manager wrote. You're responsible to make sure that you're following their directives, their vision, strategy, tactics. You provide for stability, right? So guards may come and go. There's a fair turnover in the guard force world, especially in contracted models. And we're going to talk about that a little bit here today. But you provide stability because normally those jobs don't float around. They usually are looking for promotion and staying with the company. And then the quality control on those metrics we talked about. So we talked about, shutting off coffee pots. The guards shut off 20 coffee pots last year, preventing 20 fires. That would be a good metric to show that, in fire prevention, having guards is a good thing. However, if 19 of those times the coffee pot was left on with the one in the guardhouse, that's not a good metric. That is something they're responsible for anyway. So you would say, no, we don't count our own misdeeds in our quality control metrics necessarily. We also make sure that just because a belt is squealing on something doesn't mean it's going to catch fire. There also has to be potentially, the smell of smoke, or the maintenance person when they come in tells us that the temperature on the particular piece of equipment was running high. You look for the quality control in those metrics so that you're actually reporting the truth. You're not overstating, and that's a problem with metrics in the security industry. We tend to overstate our importance. We don't need to. In the long run, the importance shows through. But you're responsible as a shift leader for quality control of metrics on your shift. Then we have security guards normally. They're the customer interface. That's the part of security that everyone sees. and they implement the post orders, directives, the protection plan, the strategy, the tactics, the vision of the manager, and through the shift leaders, they implement that, right? They get post orders to do the things they're supposed to do. Generally, a guard is there to observe and report, okay? You don't want your guards getting into fistfights, rolling around on the ground. That's not what they're there for. They're there to observe things and report things and have a process to do so. They populate the metrics. So in other words, on our coffee pot, they would be the ones that would shut off the coffee pot and then report it in their daily report or some other mechanism that we capture that metric. They respond. They get dispatched to things and they respond. Guards are normally used for monitoring functions, although that is changing some with the advent of more modern, they call them SOCs, Security Operations Centers, where people are monitoring not only for alarms and cameras on their own location, but also world events and local events that may impact your facility, and then also preparing intel products. It's kind of a niche market now that some of you may be interested in after graduation. But generally, guards will monitor alarms in some way and monitor cameras in some way. Then they have other tasks as assigned, and we'll have a unit actually on business enablement where you'll see where guards can actually do other things outside of the security realm that don't take their eye off their original job, but add value to the organization and thus embed them in the organization and make it harder for somebody to have you reduce your number of guards to cut budget later. So those other tasks as assigned can be very important, and again, in future weeks we have a unit just on that. Oftentimes you'll have an administration function within your security department, and primarily that comes to access system population and issuing ID badges. So as you know, you use your student ID to get in and out of your dormitories or other buildings with an access control system. In my physical security class, if you've taken it, hopefully you know how those work. But somebody has to populate your name and badge number, excuse me, and give you certain permissions so that badge that you present knows which doors to open and which ones not to open, and what time of day to open it, what time of day not to open it. And that administrator usually takes care of the access system, population, and administration. They take care of key control. Think about Slippery Rock University and the number of doors. Just think about the number of doors at a place like that, and almost all of them have a key. And those keys can't all be the same. There's a master key that likely fits most of them. Some are not, but most of them will fit with a master key. But when you get a key to your office, they don't give you a master key that also fits your boss's office, the president's office, the cash handling office, the cafeteria, any of those things. They're all separate keys, and key control is an important part of security administration. They handle security awareness materials and distribution. The posters that go up to remind you to lock your office at night, to remind you to call somebody if you're going to walk outside the building after dark so you can get an escort from security, to remind you to park in the right places as opposed to right up against the building where there's no parking signs, right? Those types of awarenesses, including some on local crime prevention. There's tons of security awareness programs and materials available to a security manager who gives them to the administrator, make sure they get distributed out to the masses. They compile the metrics. So as the guards enter the metrics, and the shift leader looks at those metrics and says, okay, these are valid. We didn't make these up. We didn't pad them, and we didn't just use our own misdeeds to add to the metrics. They turn them over to the administrator, who then compiles them and can show to the manager, okay, so we had 20 coffee pots left on last year. 15 of them were in the first 6 months. And then one of our security awareness programs was working with safety on fire prevention, reminding people to shut off their coffee pots at night. And it went down from 15 to 5 in the second half. That would show that your campaign, your awareness campaign, along with the safety person, worked. And therefore, the metric would be a positive one for you to report when you talk to your boss. As a security manager, you have a boss, and you went to your boss and said, look at the good things we did this year. We worked with safety. We reduced the potential for fire by a considerable amount in the second half, and we're just going to keep on that so that we can keep that happening. A lot of times this is the administrative assistant to the security department, simply as a matter of function and a matter of keeping costs down, but not always. In fact, I had 4 administrative people at one site that worked mostly on badging and key control, although I had locksmiths as well, which is unusual, and we'll see that. Normally, it's the administrative assistant that handles the administration side in a mid to smaller size security department, but it may not be. And they do the coordination of the ESRM. Now, by coordination, I mean setting the appointments. sending out materials to people to say, can you meet with the manager at such and such a time to discuss the ESRM, and this is what you'll need to have ready when they meet. And then the materials are brought back, given to this administration person, and then they put all of the ESRM findings, right, the things that keep people awake at night, those discussions you have with partners, they'll put them into a format so the security manager can look at them in a kind of a holistic way, as opposed to just having raw data on paper. They'll help you coordinate that. Administrative function, extremely important. Maybe one person, maybe 10 people, depending on the size of the organization. But it's something that you definitely want to be able to get in your organization at some point to help make your life easier, quite frankly. We also have a system support person. Now, that's usually electronics focused. So think about all those card readers on the doors at the university, right? The door on your dorm room, if you stay in the dorms, right? You run your badge and it lets you in the building and it lets you in your door, perhaps. I'm not sure if you're on card access for every room. I think so. But nonetheless, those locks wear out. The readers go bad. Even the little lights on them, if there's a little light on the style reader that's being used, goes out. It needs to be fixed. That's what system support does, right? They also then support the software upgrades, licensing for cameras. Cameras actually have to have a license from the manufacturer each year. You buy a camera license, or some camera manufacturers will sell it to you in the beginning, but you basically license that camera. It's an add-on. It's a tax, if you will, from the manufacturer. But you've got to have them. Otherwise, if you don't have a valid license, the camera stops working, right? It's how they make their money ongoing. The system support person will update those. If a camera needs to be cleaned because the lens has something on it, right? Something got into the dome, if it had a dome, or if it didn't even, they go and they adjust the lenses and adjust the lighting. They might do full repair and installation of access control video surveillance, or they might just maintain it. But they maintain metrics on the system itself, the system life cycle. Very important to you if you're a security manager to understand how often you need to buy new cameras. Cameras generally last about 12 to 15 years in normal wear and tear, normal environments. That's the life cycle that most manufacturers will quote to you. However, the warranty on them is only 5 years. Do you always want to have your system under warranty? Perhaps, depending on where you are, how hard it is to have somebody work on them. So you want to know what the life cycle is and the repairs, and they maintain those metrics and those records. They ensure the systems have high integrity through those scheduled maintenance programs, right? If you don't occasionally go and clean and adjust your cameras, you will have bad pictures, bad view. Something will happen, and you pull it up, and you've just got this blur. So they make sure that the systems are maintained on a regular basis. This might be a shared resource with another department, too. So the person who works on fire systems or building automation systems, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, communications, anything like that may also work on your security systems. So it may not be a direct report to the security department. It could be somebody who works in engineering and facilities, but they are an important part of your organization because you need to have systems that have good integrity so that when something happens, you can go back and say, these are the records I pulled and they're the right ones and everything worked and the cameras worked right. So system support, again, an important part of the security organization, whether or not they are a direct report to the security organization or not. And then finally, we have our partners. So when you have partners, think about the fact that you run a department in a big organization. Well, everybody needs to get paid. Right? All of those people that we just talked about, all those different roles, everybody expects to get a paycheck every week, 2 weeks, month, whatever the pay plan is. Would you go out and hire a payroll person? Not really, because your organization already has one. But you need to understand that they do have one. Same thing with IT support. Most of these, even down to the guard shack level, and guards are carrying normally tablets or some sort of a cell phone device, cell phone-like device, if you will, to do watch tours and record incidents, take pictures of things when they go wrong. Somebody's got to support those. You're not going to hire somebody, but you need to make sure that your organization has someone who understands what your devices are that you use and is willing to help you with the repair of those. Otherwise, you're going to need to find a contract or bring a person in and hire another person just to maintain the guard tablets and visitor systems and other things that the guards may work on. So you need to understand who those partners are, but don't necessarily go out and buy them all. A locksmith, for instance. Most facilities departments have a door hardware specialist. I'm sure there is one at Slippery Rock, right? It's the person who comes and works on the doors and the locks because doors are a moving thing, and moving things wear out. The door closer sometimes, when you open the door, it shuts too fast and you almost get hit in the back, right, when it's closing. The door needs adjustment. The door closer needs adjustment. Someone from the facilities department is trained to do that. You don't need to go out and hire a door hardware specialist. They probably can change out locks as well. So if it's available to you at no budget cost to you, then take advantage of it. But as a security manager, when you come into your organization, you're going to want to see who those partners are. Think about everything that could go wrong with your organization, your equipment, what the expectations are for any standalone business, and make sure somebody's got that covered so that you don't have a hole in your operation. So in the security organization, the impact of mission and size is something that people tend to overlook, and it's a little hard to understand, so I'll try to explain it. The mission of your organization can have a lot to do with how you compose and the size of your security function. Regulatory needs are a huge thing, right? If you are in a regulated environment, again, the nuclear facility, pharmaceutical facility as well, where you are required to have a certain amount of coverage, you're required to be able to maintain certain things. So the chemical facility anti-terrorism standards is a relatively, I'd say relatively new. I think 2015 was the last iteration, where chemical facilities need to be able to show that they can protect against certain types of terrorist activity, right? Theft, fire, explosion. Those are regulatory needs. You'll find that you need to add more security people when you are under that regulatory umbrella, because in order to control access to your facility to prevent theft, you have to have more people to do that. So it will definitely impact the size of your guard force, essentially, and then the support functions. You may have more and more system stuff. You may need 2 systems people to handle all the cameras and all of the card readers and alarms that you may need to meet a regulatory requirement. If you have armed guards versus unarmed guards, you're certainly going to add a few people, at a minimum, someone to run your armory. You normally don't want your guards to take their weapons home with them. You don't want them to modify those weapons. There's a liability there, right? Can you imagine if everybody got to decide on their own ammo when it came to a security function? So if your whole purpose, if you have an armed guard, is to deter, and you don't have a shoot to kill type environment, right? Shoot to maim may be your type of environment, and one guy is using a standard load, the other one has a hollow point that he's got charged up enough that it feels like a howitzer going off. There's a problem. So you would need to have, if you have armed people, you would need to have an armorer who is trained in standardization of your weapons, right? And then there has to be weapons training. So now you're maybe going to need another trainer to do range training to make sure that everybody goes to the range and that they're qualified. Whether your facility is entry controlled or public accessed. So if I have a facility that is 1 million square feet and it's buttoned up, I may have 1 entry point where I have a guard, and I may have 2 more inside doing roving patrols. That sounds about right. But if that happens to be a mall and it's a Saturday afternoon or a Friday night or Saturday night, I'm going to want to have more than 3 people. I won't need anybody for access control, right? Because the people can come and go as they please. But I'm going to need at least 1 in the parking lot for safety. I'm going to want 2 or 3 at least inside in a mall of 1 million square feet, probably more. I'm going to need dispatchers. I'm going to need a lot of things because it's publicly accessed. That may increase or decrease the size depending on your access control. And then your core business focus. Again, are you a warehouse where that 1 million square feet is filled with your company is sells games, right? Sells toys, right? You have 1 million square feet of toys, or do you have 1 million square feet of ammunition and cigarettes? Whatever your core business is will impact the size of your contingent, your security contingent, right? It's the mission. The size of the facility and the size of the operation also have an impact. It needs to be scalable. By scalable, I mean, if you set up your organization to have shift leaders and you have 1 per building, what happens if you add 1 more small building? Must you add another shift leader? Or can you say, we have 4 leaders, right? 4 area leaders, we'll call them, right? 1 for building A, B, C, and D. We just added building E, which is about its size of a 2.5 car garage. It's closest to building B, so we just give it to the person in building B. It has a different building number, but it's scalable, right? once you get to the point of, okay, now we've added buildings G and H and big, now you're adding more of those mid-level supervisors, if you will, right? Those shift leaders, as we're calling them. So it's scalable. Your operation, your organization doesn't change. You're just adding more people to the different functions that you have. If you keep having to add more functions, it gets complex, right? Larger facilities may need more or less people. You know, we talked about that mall. If it's open, you don't need more people. Let's think about economies of scale. If I have a building where it is 100,000 square feet, now to give you 100,000 square feet is probably a little smaller than Spots on campus, the World Culture Building, right? I'd say probably altogether the Weissenfluh dining hall, and with the upstairs and the meeting rooms, probably pretty close to 1,000 square feet. You may need 1 or 2 people there at night, right? So you have 2 people. If that building were twice its size, would you need 4? If it were 3 times its size, would you need 6? The answer is not necessarily, right? If you have 2 people and the building grows and it doubles in size, you might want to think about adding a 3rd, but you certainly don't need to double it depending on what the functions of those people are. So there's an economy of scale that goes with staffing a guard contingent especially. And then occupied versus unoccupied space. Unoccupied space is more manpower intensive. I want you to remember that. When someone says, you know, you need to set up a security organization for a building, and by the way, there's another building being built behind it, it's not occupied yet, it won't be for about another 6 months. You wouldn't have the same number of people, right? Occupied buildings, you have to worry about more people for bringing visitors in, but after hours, unoccupied space, you need more people because nobody's going to alert you to things going wrong. So think about that. When a building is occupied, nobody's really walking around doing a fire watch. If you've got 100 employees walking around in your building, they're going to tell you if something's on fire. When they go home, the guard's walking around, you're relying on the fire system and that guard to tell you when something's on fire. You need more coverage when you have a facility that is unoccupied. So unoccupied facilities normally have a larger contingent. That's something important to remember. And the reason I say that is because in the future, one of your bosses is going to say, well, we're closing that building, so you won't need to have all those guards over there. Well, maybe true about entry control and visitors coming in, but not true about patrols, because now you've got to patrol them all the time because nobody's there to tell you what's going wrong. So keep that in the back of your mind when you get that first job. Unoccupied buildings, you're asking for more people, not less. One of the big things to decide once you have your security organization set, right? You need a manager. Do you need shift leaders? Do you need an administrator? Do you need blah, 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 blah? All those positions we had, right? Do you need them because your organization is such that it makes sense? Now it's the composition and how are you going to provide for that? And there are generally three models: a contracted model, a proprietary model, and a hybrid model. Okay? The contracted model is simply leased employees. You normally go through a security service provider. In the U.S., the big ones are Allied Universal, Securitas, G4S, Garda. There's a few more out there. There's a lot of, we call them mom and pops in the industry, right? Your local security provider that may be local to a county or even just a state or a few states. But these are where you get contracted, normally guards, but just about anything can be contracted. Fully leased contracted employees. None of them are employees of the place they're protecting. Now, the proprietary model is just the opposite. They're all in-house employees directly hired by the company and the facility they're protecting. It is very uncommon, actually, in the U.S. now to have a proprietary model. It requires more people because you have to provide the trainers, the equipment. You have to lead them completely, right? Nobody's going to handle anything for you. In a contracted model, you'll see that they provide some of the training and those things. But in a proprietary model, you have to provide all that. And then there's a hybrid model. In a larger setting, normally you have some people who are in-house employees, and you supplement with contracted employees. It can be inverted. Normally people think, well, the chief security officer and the manager are going to be employees, and maybe the shift leaders, then they're going to contract the guards. That may or may not be true. Sometimes it's the other way around. And there's a reason for that. So it can be inverted where the more skilled positions are contracted and the less skills are proprietary. But co-employment can be an issue with that, and we'll talk about co-employment, and I think you'll find that discussion quite interesting. So the big decision point, in my opinion, for why you go either contracted, proprietary, or hybrid is in liability shifting. Liability shifting essentially means who holds the most exposure if there's an event or of error. Let's go with that armed guard. An armed guard goes on a patrol, sees someone down the end of a dark hallway. It's not supposed to be there. They say stop. The person doesn't stop. They say stop where you are. They say stop or I'll shoot. And they shoot that person. They go down, they turn the light on, they find the one deaf employee who didn't hear them and didn't see them in the dark hallway. That would be a very bad error. It'd be a use of force error, right? But there could be a discrimination issue even in that, right? But your guards could make an error in discrimination against someone they just don't care to let in. You know, your guard at the front desk could be a racist, and someone comes up with color that wants to come into the facility, and they say, you know what, I don't get a good feeling about this guy, and I'm not going to let him in. That could be a discrimination complaint, obviously. There could be delinquent hiring and wrongful termination issues with liability. So if the employee is mine and I hired them and I find out that they have a long history of being a rapist and it's known, they've served time for that, I hired them and they raped somebody on the job, I have an extreme liability. But maybe I've shifted that to somebody else if they've actually hired them and they work for another company who I've asked to send me certification. Everybody they place is clear of felonies, right? Then there's failure to perform. If I have my guards and in their post orders I tell them in the wintertime they must check for slippery sidewalks every 2 hours, and if they are slippery they need to report it to the maintenance department, and potentially there's rock salt in the patrol vehicle, go apply some in the meantime, and they don't do that, then I have some liability for the slip and fall. As the owner of the facility, that's not really going to go away so much, but I have shifted some of that where I've said, look, I contracted for that service and my contractor didn't come through. I've shifted some of that liability to that contractor. So liability shifting is a huge issue when it comes to deciding whether or not, it's very easy, and I've asked students this in the past, very easy to say, well, if I set up my organization, I only want proprietary people. Well, if you do, you take on all the liability as well, so it's a trade-off. So let's look at each one of those models, those three models in depth. Contracted model. The entire security function from the chief security officer to the guard can be contracted. And I have seen that happen more than once. People don't think it happens that way. When you go to even some big companies and you want to see the security director, that security director may work for a security company. They have an office in the facility, right? They have an employee badge on. They come up to meet you, and you assume that they work directly for the company. Right? You have a complaint, you have a concern, you want to see the security manager. You may be talking to someone who works for a contracted security organization. And that contracted firm handles all the facets. They handle ESRM, equipment maintenance, that selection of systems, selection of subcontractors. They determine what types of keys and locks you're going to use. It's called a turnkey operation. And a turnkey operation, I think one of the best examples of a turnkey operation to me is Amazon. When you go order something from Amazon, and so let's just say you order a new pair of shoes, you don't have to go and figure out how those shoes are going to get to you. Now, Amazon just recently has switched to their own trucks, and you'll see the Amazon Blue trucks out there on the road, but for the most part, Amazon delivers their things through the U.S. Postal Service, UPS, or some sort of contracted delivery firms, DHL, FedEx, right? When you order something from Amazon, it's not always an Amazon truck that shows up. But did you have to pick which one? Did you have to determine how much that costs? Did you have to decide when it was going to be delivered? All of that's decided for you. It's a turnkey. You just say, I want to buy those shoes. Amazon, here's $50. Send my shoes. And miraculously 2 days later, Boom, there's your shoes on the front step and a picture on your cell phone of it sitting there to say it's been delivered, and everything's right with the world. You only had to pick the shoes and push a couple buttons. That's a turnkey operation. You didn't have to worry about the shipping. Did you have to worry about paying the tax on those? You paid the tax to Amazon, but the tax goes to your state as a sales tax, perhaps? Did you have to worry about saying, okay, well, Amazon, I'm spending $50 on the shoes, and I know the tax in my state is 6%, so that's $3. So I'll send you the 50, and then I'll write a check to the state and mail that off too. No, Amazon took care of that for you. They charged the sales tax, and they sent it off to the state on your behalf, right? Something you bought. They paid the tax. You paid it, but they paid it for you as far as the administration. Did you have to tell them to put it in a box? They put it in a box. Everything was turnkey, done for you. And a contracted security organization can do that and will do that for you, but it costs a lot of money. A fully turnkey operation can be as expensive or more expensive, but it allows a company to just concentrate on their core business. So if my core business is the manufacture of toys, I can contract out my entire security organization and I can concentrate on making the best toys. I don't have to worry about having a security manager. I don't have to worry about training them. I don't have to worry about that. It's all taken care of for me. And that is the best model for liability shifting, because all you have to say as the owner is that I've contracted that out. I have a solid contract that says they accept the liability. It's not full indemnification. Somebody slips and falls on your property, you're still going to get sued. But you do have a recourse to go back to that security company to say, you told me your guards were going to check the sidewalks to make sure they weren't slippery. You didn't do that, so I want some restitution from you if I get sued. So it's best for liability shifting in a fully contracted model. Opposite end of the spectrum, fully proprietary model. Everybody from the chief security officer down through the ranks of managers and shift leads and guards and systems, everybody works for the company that you work for, right? There's no contracting at all. Now, the security manager and their reports are responsible for buying uniforms, buying the equipment, training, making sure that's delivered and on time, the insurance and liability insurance of security officers. There's licensing required, and you have to make sure that everybody is fully licensed and have copies of those licenses available. You have to make sure they have physical clearances to do the job. I mean, all of that falls back to you in a proprietary model. Now, generally, and there's a lot of studies on loyalty and satisfaction, proprietary guards tend to be happier and more satisfied with their job because they tend to get paid more. They tend to have very long tenure. They stick around. They get the job and they stick around. Contracted model has a pretty high turnover rate. In fact, I believe it's 150% per year on average, where you're constantly turning over security guards. It's just the way. And in fact, when someone downtown is going to pay 25 cents more per hour, everybody runs and takes that security job and leaves you high and dry. You have very long tenure with proprietary, but that can be good and bad. Let me give you an example. When I was 30 years old, I didn't have much trouble climbing up a ladder. I am now 60 years old. I'm not as confident climbing up that ladder, at least into really high areas. I don't like ladders anyway, to be totally truthful. But as an example, once you get to be close to retirement age, you probably want to dial back some of those physical things that you did as a youth. When I was 48 years old, 12 years ago, I tore my bicep. I was doing a deadlift of 455 pounds, which for those of you that lift, that's a fair amount, especially for somebody almost 50 years old. Now at age 60, 225, I won't go over it. Because if you see me in a short sleeve shirt, you'll see a major scar down my left, inside of my left elbow, to remind me that when you're older, you don't do stupid stuff, right? So the good and the bad of long tenure is, as you get older, it's harder to get physical things out of people. It's just a fact, right? And as a security guard, there are certain things you may need to do. You may need to climb ladders to go up onto a roof or down into a pit in a manufacturing area, because sometimes there are pumps and things that are down lower by gravity feed, right? So that's just one example. Climbing stairs even. You can't say to somebody, you're too old for this job. That is illegal to do that. So if a security guard wants to work until they're 70, you're going to have a real burden to say that they are not physically able to do the job if they have trouble climbing stairs. You may need to make accommodations, okay? So long tenure sometimes is a bad thing, often good because of the loyalty factor. There is significant support you have to have for a proprietary model, though. You've got to have a trainer. You've got to keep all records. You've got to make sure that everybody's background check is redone every so often. Whereas with a contracted model, the contractor does that for you. All liability goes to you. It is the worst for liability shifting. No matter what happens, if they are your employees, you are responsible for them and their actions while they're in the workplace, unless they really step outside the confines of the job. There are laws that say if they go out and murder somebody, and murdering somebody is not part of their job description, then perhaps you don't have liability. But in the case of the guard who shot the deaf person, therein lies some serious liability. Because they should have known to go turn on the light first, or they should have known that if the person wasn't really pointing a weapon back at them, why did they shoot in the first place? That liability doesn't get shifted now, it stays with you. And for both of those other models, the hybrid model I think offers you a pretty good compromise, and it is a compromise. Generally, your more skilled people are proprietary in an organization and less skilled contracted. Excepting for system support, and that's important to know, because system support requires a fair amount of training. You have to understand the electronics and the software, and you're just constantly in retraining on those things, because as anybody who's even remotely familiar with technology will tell you, it changes every day. And so a system support person needs to be constantly updating themselves on their skill set. So even though the system support may fall below the shift leaders and the manager, they generally are somebody that you don't want to have in-house no matter what, because you have to constantly be training them. But generally, your manager and your shift leaders in a hybrid model in a large organization is the way are proprietary, and then guards, administrators, and others are contracted. Sometimes you can tout a hybrid model as being a cost-saving thing. Look, we're not, spending our money on guards, right? Less. I don't want to say less important, because that's not at all the case, but less skilled labor, quite frankly, is cheaper if you contract it. But it's not always meaningful impact. Okay. There's this misnomer that, well, we contract out our guards because we're saving big money. Frankly, it's about a wash what you pay for a proprietary guard versus a contract guard. I think the savings come in because there's such a turnover in the contractor that you don't worry about the raises as often, right? When somebody sticks around for a while, they get an annual raise, and they may come into profit sharing or a stock program or something along that line, whereas that doesn't happen with the contracted. So that's where the savings come. The cost per hour is almost the same in almost every case. There's a mixed loyalty in a hybrid model. Okay, the contracted guards normally come in with the idea that they will eventually aspire to one of those in-house roles. So if you have in-house manager, in-house shift leaders, and contracted guards, just about every one of those guards comes in with the idea that at some point I'll get promoted and I'll be hired directly by the company, and I'll be able to enjoy the same benefits and higher pay normally associated with those people who work directly for the company. But when there's no clear path to that transition, which you really shouldn't make anyway, then that loyalty tends to wane. And there are definitely co-employment issues that we need to talk about. So what is co-employment? When contracted employees are so assimilated into a company, when they have become so much like an employee, the law says that they may have some claim to the same rights, treatment, money, and benefits as a regular employee. And it's been court tested with some mixed results, quite frankly. Microsoft hired people in as contracted coders back 20, 30 years ago, right? When they were really in their infancy, they were really in their growth mode. They didn't hire in-house programmers. They hired freelancers and contractors. In fact, we see this with Uber right now. Uber and Lyft going through, constantly the challenge to whether or not their people are contractors or employees, right? They are so integral to the business, and they stay for so long, and they get a check made out to them from the company that they say, wait a minute, I'm entitled to the same benefits as the people who work in your headquarters. The Microsoft case, though, involved independent contractors as opposed to ones that work for like a contracted guard company. But it's still a valuable lesson for talking about how you construct a contract, right? To make sure that every person that comes in under contract acknowledges that employment relationship. You should make sure that any contractor you use provides you a copy of a statement from everybody they assign to your facility that says, I am a contractor. I understand I don't work for ABC company, toy company. I am a contractor of XYZ security company, and I am entitled to their benefits, pay, and allowances, and not to those of ABC Toy. You also need to make sure you keep a level of separation. It is not unusual at all when you are a shift leader to have guards come to you and ask you for a raise, or ask you to change their schedule because they have something going on and they want you to do that. Your shift leader should not be doing guard scheduling and should not be involved at all in guard pay. The reason is the more you get involved with someone else's employee, the more liability you take on for that employee. If your whole idea is shifting liability, then you really negate that by getting overly involved with that contracted employee. So you need, as an employee of the company, if you're the security manager or shift leader who is an employee of ABC Toy, you need to make sure that the XYZ security folks, you can certainly be friends with them. You're going to work with them on a daily basis. They will become side-by-side partners with you in the security effort. But you also need to understand that you can't get involved in their pay, their vacations, their scheduling. Any dispute they may have with their employer is off limits to you. Otherwise, you shift that liability back to yourself. The whole idea of contracting is to shift it away, and you're going to take it right back on again if you get overly involved. So that is where we are this week. I hope that you took to heart some of the information about how to set up a security organization. You will most likely, in that first security job, if that's what you choose to do with your life, and it's something that's been very good for me, you will most likely walk into a security organization that is already somewhat structured. However, as you move up, you will have the opportunity to restructure. And I strongly suggest you look at a scalable organization, one without too many layers, that you contract out the things that make sense, system support being definitely one of them, guards potentially being one of them, that you understand that you can have a hybrid organization to shift some of the liability and to keep some of the control. But you can go fully contracted or fully proprietary. None of the models really save you money one or over the other because there's just different shifts of the way the money goes out, right? Contract company wants a kick for the guard they bring in. If they bring him in for $10 an hour and you would normally pay a proprietary $15, you're still going to pay that $15 plus to that guard company because they have overhead money that they need. They want to make a profit. They have certain taxes they have to pay. So it's a wash. So I just want you to understand that when you set up the organization, there are different factors to think about. So this week there's some reading on co-employment, on different security models. You'll see Dave Commandant from Boeing discuss the differences that he sees between the contracted and proprietary model. And I think you'll be surprised at how many of us that are in the industry lean more toward a contracted model or a hybrid and away from fully proprietary. Again, when I've asked students in discussions which one they prefer, they always say proprietary because we want our people to be treated well, we want them to be happy, and we want them to make the most money. That's great. That's laudable. I get it. But it's not realistic within an assigned budget that you may have, and it may not be the best thing for you, and you have to think about, as an agent of your company, doing the best thing for the company. So, the reading, the lecture, you are done, and there is a quiz on this unit only this week. So, if you have questions or concerns, call, write, text. Make sure you get in touch with me. Everything needs to be done on time. This is a quiz week, so everything's due on Sunday. Be sure you have the reading available for the quiz. If you don't, there are some quiz questions that are pretty specific to the reading, and if you don't have it available to you, you may not remember it. Going forward, we're going to start pulling everything together over the next several weeks, and you'll be surprised what you've learned so far in this course. Once you start to tie it all together, you say, okay, this is kind of what a security manager does, and this is how they function. So looking forward to the tie-in weeks, if you will, as we go forward. With that, have a great week, and I will see you on campus.